Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga Night 60. Yesterday, I had the honor of registering as a candidate for mayor in the Mississauga by-election that's coming up with the election on June the 10th. Several people have said to me, you know, you've got 4 established candidates that are existing councillors on council, have been there, some of them, for quite a while. And they've got established networks. They've got, fundraising lists. They've got signs. They've got offices. They've got brand name awareness. How are you going to possibly compete with them? And why are you doing this? To which I had to say, you know what? Because I think we've got several crises in Mississauga today. I think we're on the wrong path in Mississauga today. And to give responsibility to the very people that created that path to try to fix it, I'm not sure if that's the smartest thing. There's that old line about, don't change the deck chairs don't shuffle the deck chairs on the Titanic. We have got a housing crisis in Mississauga, and I'll talk about some other crises at other times, but we've got a housing crisis in Mississauga that I think is a moral imperative to improve. It's not just economic. It's just not an economic problem. It is an equity issue. We have the largest generational inequity probably in history. Most generations pass on to their children, the next generation, a better economic future. We are not doing that. We're one of the first generations in history that is going to pass on a worse economic future. And it's not just housing affordability. It's basic living affordability. It's high debt, high deficit, lack of investment in infrastructure, climate change, a whole bunch of other issues. But housing affordability has got to be, particularly in Mississauga and the Greater Toronto Area, one of, if not the biggest issues. And for a lot of reasons that we all know about. We are building as many homes today as we did in the 1970s, and yet our population is 2.5 times the size. Housing prices used to be, people would think of a mortgage 3 times your salary. Now it takes something like 20 years to save up the down payment for the typical person. And housing prices and mortgages are 9 to 12 times what people's salaries are. The vast majority of people just can't afford a home unless you are enjoying the bank of some relatives, mom and dad. You win a lottery, or you rent out a bunch of the rooms to somebody else, which is not a bad idea. I think that city councillors and city council that have laid the groundwork for our planning approval process and get way too involved in the approval process are the cause of these problems. And you're starting to see some councillors get religion on this and understand it, but not completely. The city of Mississauga had, a city planner, former city planner of Vancouver, come and speak to a big conference at the Living Arts Centre back in January, talked about how Mississauga has really got some challenges and talked about what the vision was for the future, and that density and height and walkable communities and things like this that are not Mississauga's heritage are some of the things that we needed to focus on. I think there's a couple of things that we need to do on housing. The first one is faster reviews. StatsCan, CMHC, other people have done studies that have said that we've got the slowest approval processes in the world. And Toronto, Mississauga, Victoria, Vancouver are some of the worst in that regard, where lots of people will tell you it takes time, 2 times, 3 times as long to get an approval for a development as it does to actually build that development. And there's no value add, or very little value add, in that whole process. It's just a real time for communities to, and I'm not saying communities don't have a right, they should. It should be done more efficiently, more effectively, quicker. But communities to complain over and over and over again to developments in their area, and planning staffs with 12 to 20 departments all having an opinion on forestry, on heritage, on this thing, on that thing, on how many bike racks, on how many amenity space, what type of windows, what type of siding, what type. There is more red tape and regulation in housing than in almost any other area. So I think that faster reviews are critical. And what I would do is I would pledge that review time would be 50% of what it is today. We'll do everything we can to make review time faster. We'll compete with other municipalities on faster reviews. And if frankly deserves a no, it'll get the no more quickly, as well as the yes more quickly. I think one of the big things that BC is doing that makes a lot of sense is as of right density and height within a certain distance from a transit node. I think that makes a lot of sense. It's 12 stories. maybe it should be a little bit higher. But an as of right zoning right, such that you know that you're going to build. You don't have to go through the whole process. You don't have to go to the OLT, the Ontario Land Tribunal. You don't have to go through a whole process, that you've got a certain amount of height when you're within a certain distance from a transit zone. The province of Ontario supposedly is thinking about this for 9 months. Nothing's happened as of yet. We should have that. One of the ideas that I had, if we want to increase density and affordability very quickly, is just give a 20% increase in the density and the height to everybody. But half of that, if you're going to take advantage of that 20%, has got to be affordable or accessible housing. So if you've got 10 stories, you can go to 12, but 1 story, 8 to 10 units has got to be accessible or affordable. Or if you're 50 stories, you can go to 60, or 40, you can go to 48. But half of the extra that we are going to grant you from the city has got to be affordable or accessible. And people get worried about affordable, but the reality is affordable housing, the way that they deem it, is 80% or so of market rent. So it's still reasonably high. But I do think we need some of those more deeply or affordable homes. Otherwise, we're going to be a community only of the rich. So I think general supply's got to increase. That brings general affordability more in line. But then in addition, we need to have inclusionary zoning, which effectively what that is, which is saying, I'm going to incentivize you, Mr. Developer. I'm going to give you 20% more, but half of what I give you, I want you to have as affordable or accessible, which is one of the things that I think CMHC and other people are demanding today and getting, and they end up being really important to people that have some accessibility issues. I'm going to do a show tomorrow on accessibility issues with the unstoppable Tracy Schmidt, who is just wonderful. Benjamin Tal made a recommendation in the Globe and Mail, which I agree with completely. I've argued for this for a while, is the 1031 exchanges that exist in the United States make a lot of sense. Let me explain this to you. If a real estate owner, not necessarily just a developer, but anyone that owns real estate in the United States, sells something and then immediately takes their profit and invests it in something of equal or greater value, they delay their tax. And so the government gets the tax eventually, and frankly might get more tax because the person takes out the $100,000 they made and invested in something else and turns it into $200,000. So the capital gain that they ultimately going to get may be equal or greater, but what it is going to be is it's going to be taxed later on in time, which allows compounding at a higher rate. And I think makes a ton of sense. And the studies have shown that what this does is induces just regular people, but also real estate investors and developers to do more investment in real estate. And I think that makes sense. And then he also recommended secondary suites. And I think this is key because I've talked to a lot of people about these fourplexes. There is opposition to the fourplexes. And I think that would be one of the things that makes a lot of sense to put forward to a referendum. But a lot of people are supportive of the idea of a secondary suite. So, one more, whether it's in a basement or a laneway or a nanny suite or something like that, a granny suite. And the federal government, with this $40,000 loan that they're providing, it can only probably justify 200 to 300, maybe 400 square feet of construction, which is probably 2 bedrooms or a bedroom and a kitchen. That's sort of, 1 basement apartment, or 1 suite upstairs. And one of the nice things about that secondary suite, number one, you get more density, you get more housing, but number two, you actually get some people that could not afford a mortgage that all of a sudden can afford a mortgage because they got some rent coming in as well. So I think the idea of secondary suites and making those more available more quickly, the building permits approved more quickly, the loans available from the federal government, et cetera, make a ton of sense. I think that we also have to think about our urban form in Mississauga. I've heard that people describe our urban form, urban design as sort of being last generation, where we wanted all the density and all the height in downtown and nothing anywhere else. I was in City Hall yesterday to register. And you know what we brag about? Sort of like Toronto brags about the CN Tower. We brag about the Marilyn Monroe Towers. And they're gorgeous. And the reason why they're gorgeous is because Mayor Hazel McCallion in her intelligence put no height restrictions on downtown, which meant the density and height could be increased. So people hired starchitects and they built what the market demanded. And we had this confidence that the market would actually give good guidance to the developers as to what was the right thing to do. And they didn't build 80 stories, they didn't build 100 stories. They built what the market demanded. We seem to think that planners know better what the height is and know better what the market should have. I think that too many planners want short and squat rather than tall and slender. And tall and slender is the pictures that get taken that you put on the front page of your city magazine or the city website because they're beautiful. People want to look at them. People want to live in them. And every architect tells me that above 10 stories, you don't notice height. And so this incredible preoccupation with height, I don't think is rightly placed. And I think, therefore, if we allowed people to think about some height around these transit zones, in other, appropriate areas, maybe here in Ontario, for an example, we'd have more beautiful buildings that we'd be proud of because it would make economic sense for the developers to do that. And the costs of new home construction are outrageous. People tell me that development fees are like $140,000 per unit. Why are we saddling the people in our community that can least afford it with $140,000 of extra fees? And we have this attitude that development, has to pay for growth. Well, you know what? We are growing. Our federal government in its wisdom has decided on immigration. We've created an economic system that's attracting people here. We are having kids that want to have places to live and hopefully live within, a drive distance of ourselves. And yet we put all of the cost of growth into a tax on the growth such that it almost becomes uneconomic. And it either boosts prices up or it decreases supply or both, which I think is a huge mistake. And the proof of how these doesn't make sense is I'm heard that these development fees that have to be spent on growth end up creating these huge cash accounts that are so big that we can't actually spend the money, which is proof positive that we're charging way more than we should be charging. So I think development fees have got to come down. And I don't think that as some politicians suggest, is going to give, any extra money to developers. What they're going to do is they're going to either build more or reduce prices or both. Because the history of all tax increases over history has shown that it gets passed on to the consumer. So tax increases get passed on, tax decreases get passed on, because the developer needs to make a certain amount of return. And if they're making outrageous returns, other people are going to come in, compete that away. If they're making too low returns, the banks or themselves won't allow themselves to go ahead. So I think development fees have got to come down. I think that we have got to think about housing as the crisis that it's in. And again, to give responsibility to fix things and to think about new solutions, and give that responsibility to the exact same people that have shepherded the current situation, I don't think makes sense. And so what I intend to do over the course of the next month is hopefully with this platform and other platforms and during this campaign, be able to argue my point. Now invite any of the other competitors that want to come on my show to talk to me about it, to come on and talk to me about this or other issues. Because I think what we need is a really good community conversation about what is going on in Mississauga, what our vision is for Mississauga, how we want to change things. And I think we also need to talk about homelessness. Because homelessness, I've been told, is massively on the increase. And it may not be as visible in Mississauga as it is in Toronto because they're not necessarily on streets and on tents, but they're in cars. And they are in tents down by the water and in some of our parkland. I'm told that it costs about $150,000 to house someone. And it costs 5 to 10 times that to leave them homeless. And it's because they use emergency rooms, because they are big demanders for first providers. There's a lot of costs associated with society dealing with homelessness. Mental health is a big issue. Drug issue is a big issue. Crime is sometimes an issue. I think the two best social programs that exist are a home and a job. And we should start thinking about treating people like adults. Vancouver did a big study where they gave people a year's worth of what they would have gotten on a monthly check from the different social service agencies. And 80% of the people actually took that money and did something materially beneficial for their lives. Took a university course or a community services, community college course, or they put down first and last month on a rent and got into an apartment or something like that. They made materially positive changes. When you treat people like adults, they act like adults. When you treat people like kids and give them allowance once a week or once every 2 weeks, and you make them come into the department to prove that they deserve it, I think too often they act like kids. So I think housing, affordability and homelessness are two massive issues in Mississauga today, and they're only going to get worse if you don't vote for change. That's Brian Crombie on the Brian Crombie Radio Wire. I remind you, I'm on every night at 6 o'clock on 960M. You can stream me online at saga960m.ca. All my podcasts and videos are available on my website, briancrombie.com. And I remind, they just said, if any of my competitors, any of my opponents in this mayoralty campaign want to come on the show, want to come on Saga 960, give me a call. I'd love to have you. I want to have a good discussion. And I also want to listen to all of you. Give me a call.